I promise this won't be one of those speeches where I stand up here pretending I had it all figured out. I didn't. I still don't most days. But you asked me to talk about my adolescence, about the years that made me, and I've thought about how to do that honestly instead of just telling you the version that sounds good in a highlight reel. So here it is, the real one. I want to start somewhere unexpected, a chessboard in a rented flat above a laundrette at 11 o'clock at night with a man twice my size leaning over it and telling me I'd just made the worst move of my life. That man was my father, and that flat, that board, that hour of the night. But that was my childhood before it became my adolescence. I should tell you about him first because you can't understand the second thing without understanding the first. My father was a chess obsessive, not a hobbyist, an obsessive. He'd learned the game in a youth hostel somewhere in the Midwest, taught himself from library books because nobody around him could beat him past age 9, and by the time I was born, he'd built an entire identity around being the smartest man in any room he walked into. He wasn't wrong most of the time. He really was that smart. But being right about your own intelligence doesn't make you easy to live with, and it definitely doesn't make you easy to grow up under. He started teaching me the game before I could tie my shoes. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I genuinely learned the Sicilian defense before I learned to tie a proper knot, and for years my father found this hilarious and slightly proof of his own genius, as if my shoelaces were simply beneath my attention. By 6, I was playing in local tournaments against grown men and winning often enough that people started writing about me in the local paper. Boy 6 defeats club champion, that kind of thing. My father kept every clipping. He still has them, actually, in a shoebox, yellowed at the edges like relics. I remember one tournament in particular. I'd beaten 2 adults in a row, my confidence swelling in that dangerous, weightless way it does when you're a child who's just been told he's special. Then I lost 3 matches straight, badly. I was crushed, not because I lost, but because I'd tasted what winning felt like and suddenly it was gone. I asked my father in the car afterwards, staring out the window so he wouldn't see my face, will I be able to beat them when I'm grown up? He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the road and said, when you're grown, you'll beat anyone at anything you decide to master. But right now, you're still soft. Soft things lose. I was 6 years old. I didn't understand half of what that sentence meant, but at Zanzibar, I understood the tone. And the tone told me everything, that losing was not just a result. It was a diagnosis, something wrong with me that needed fixing. And fixing meant work. And work meant more nights at that board, more hours staring at 64 squares until my eyes burned, more of him standing over my shoulder saying again in a voice that made again sound like a threat. That was who I was as a boy, a chess prodigy with a newspaper clipping and a father who loved me the way a sculptor loves a block of marble. With real passion and a chisel in his hand at all times. When I was 11, my parents' marriage ended. I won't pretend I understood the mechanics of it then, and honestly, I'm not sure I fully understand them now. What I understood was simpler and more physical. One week my father bestätigde na din för na in myren västern. The naupro för dos. Vi brochi mit Zeit kan befying der he remarked in the yardies in the na. The next he wasn't. My mother packed what she could fit into 2 suitcases in a car, and she took my younger brother and me across an ocean to a gray, tired town that could not have been more different from anywhere we'd lived before. And my father stayed behind. He is Guam. He kept playing chess, kept living the way he'd always lived. Restless, itinerant, more comfortable in a tournament hall than in any house he ever called home. Like, looking back, I think he loved chess more purely than he loved almost anything else, because chess never left him and never disappointed him the way people eventually do. People are complicated. A board is not. A board just sits there honest, waiting for you to be good enough for it. The town we moved to was poor. Not poor in some romantic character building way that sounds nice in a speech. Poor in the way that means the heating doesn't always work. And you get used to the particular cold of a British winter indoors. And your mother comes home exhausted from a job that pays her far less than she deserves. And you learn not to ask for things because you can see, even as a child, the toll the asking takes on her face. My mother was extraordinary during those years, and I don't say that lightly. She held 3 of us together on very little, and she never once let us see her collapse under the weight of it, even though I now understand as an adult that she must have collapsed constantly, quietly, somewhere we weren't allowed to see. She worked long hours. She came home and cooked anyway. She never spoke badly of my father in front of us, not once, even when she had every right to. I didn't appreciate that at 11. I do now. Here's the part of the story that's harder to tell because it doesn't flatter anyone, including me. I was the new kid with a strange accent that didn't belong anywhere. I'm too American for the English kids, too changed for anyone back home. I was smaller than most of my classmates. I had a chess trophy in my bedroom and absolutely no idea how to throw a punch. And in that particular town, in that particular decade, that combination made me a target. I got into fights. A lot of them at first on the losing end. I remember coming home more than once with a split lip or a bruised eye and my mother's face doing something complicated, worry and anger and a kind of helpless level at once. And I remember lying to her about how it happened because I didn't want her carrying one more thing. What changed things wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was slow. I started running because running was free and it let out something in me that needed letting out. I found an old punching bag at a youth center and I hit it until my knuckles bled. Not because anyone told me to, but because it was the only place I was allowed to be angry without consequence. Somewhere in that process, the fighting stopped being about survival and started being about control, about proving mostly to myself that I wasn't soft. That word again, my father's word, it had followed me across an ocean. I want to be honest with you about something. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you toughness solved everything because it didn't. It solved a very narrow problem being underestimated by other 13-year-olds. And it created several new ones because a boy who learns that the answer to fear is force doesn't always know when to put the force down. I carried some of that too far into adulthood before I learned better. I'm not proud of every version of myself that adolescence produced. I'm just telling you the truth of how I got here. My father and I spoke on the phone during those years sporadically, usually about chess because chess was the language we both still knew fluently even when everything else between us had gone quiet. He'd ask about my openings. He'd critique a game I described to him from memory, finding the mistake I'd made on move 14 without ever having seen the board. He was, infuriatingly, always right. I used to resent him for that distance, for choosing tournaments over a house with his kids in it. I've made a kind of peace with it since, though peace might be too generous a word. What I've settled on is something, something closer to understanding without excusing. He gave me discipline the way some fathers give their sons a family business, as an inheritance, whether I wanted it or not. He was hard on me. He hit me sometimes when I made mistakes. He thought, I should have known better than to make. And for a long time, I told that story the way he would have wanted it told, as toughness, as the making of a man, as something to be grateful for rather than something to grieve. I'm not going to tell you today that it was simply good for me. It wasn't simply anything. It gave me a spine of iron and it gave me wounds I spent years pretending weren't there. Both things are true. I think a lot of us, when we talk about our fathers, want a clean story. Hero or villain made me strong or broke me down. Mine doesn't sort that neatly, and I've stopped trying to force it to. If I'm honest, it wasn't fighting and it wasn't chess that got me through those years intact. It was a teacher, as a maths teacher of all people, a woman named Mrs. Aldous, who noticed I was sharp and bored and angry all at once, a combustible combination in a classroom. And instead of punishing the anger, she gave the sharpness somewhere to go. She put me in a regional competition. She stayed after school some Thursdays just to give me harder problems. Because the easy ones weren't holding my attention, and my attention, unheld, tended to go looking for trouble. She never asked about my home life. She didn't need to. She just kept handing me things to solve, kept telling me I was good at this in a voice that had none of my father's edge in it. No threat behind the praise. No sense that failure would cost me something. It was the first time an adult had believed in me without a chisel in their other hand. But I think about her more than I think about almost anyone else from those years. Not because she rescued me from anything dramatic. Nothing about it looked like a rescue at the time, but because she was proof that discipline and cruelty aren't the same thing, that you can push someone hard and still be gentle with them. And I badly needed to see that modeled by somebody because I certainly wasn't getting it anywhere else. I want to say something about growing up without money because it's talked about a lot in the abstract and not often on. Poverty doesn't ennoble you. I want to be clear about that because there's a tempting narrative. The plucky kid who grew up with nothing and it made him hungry, made him great. And there's some truth buried in it, but it skips over the actual texture of what it's like. What it actually teaches you day to day is a kind of vigilance. Like, you notice things other kids don't notice. Like, you know exactly how much things cost. You develop an internal calculator that never fully switches off, even decades later, even once the money problem is long solved. You learn to want things quietly because wanting loudly puts a weight on people you love who are already carrying too much. What it also teaches you, Legend, this is the part worth keeping, is precisely how much you can survive. And there is a strange, hard-won confidence that comes from having gone without and made it through anyway. It's not a confidence I'd wish on anyone as a method, but if you've been through it, you know the thing I'm talking about. A floor beneath you that nothing since has managed to knock out because you already know what the bottom feels like, and it turns out you can stand on it. There was a stretch around 15 and 16 where I nearly let all of it curdle into something worse. I was angry at my father for leaving, angry at the town for being the town it was, angry at myself in the specific way teenage boys get angry at themselves without being able to name what for. I skipped school. I got into the kind of trouble that could have gone somewhere much darker than it did. And I want to be honest about that instead of editing it out to make a tidier story. What pulled me back from the edge of it wasn't a single lightning bolt moment. It was, again, slow. A combination of my mother's exhausted, unwavering presence, Mrs. Aldis's stubborn belief in my brain, and eventually my own dawning realization that the anger, however justified, was going to cost me my future if I let it keep steering. Nobody sat me down and fixed me in one conversation. I fixed myself slowly over about 2 years, mostly by choosing, I tanto inate, I kick so bars, again and again on days I didn't feel like choosing it. To do the harder, more boring thing instead of the thing that felt good for 5 minutes. So I mention this because I think we do young people a disservice when we only tell them the version of the story where the turnaround is dramatic and instant. Mine wasn't. It was 1,000 small mornings of deciding not to waste the day. If I could sit down across from myself at 14, across an actual table, the way my father used to sit across a chessboard from me, I don't think I'd tell him to be tougher. He already knew how to be tough. Toughness was never his problem. I think I'd tell him that being hard on yourself isn't the same as being strong, and that the two get confused constantly, especially by boys who've had a father who taught them that mistakes deserve punishment rather than correction. I'd tell him that his mother's quiet endurance was a form of strength at least equal to anything his father displayed with a chessboard and a raised voice, and that he should have said thank you more while he had the chance to say it to her face without a lump in his throat. I'd tell him that the fights he won didn't make him who he is nearly as much as the maths problems Mrs. Aldis handed him on Thursday afternoons, and that he should pay more attention going forward to the quiet people who believe in him than to the loud ones who only respect him after he's proven something.